Hello, YouTube. Um, so my last review was Glengoyne 10-year-old, very good, um, relatively inexpensive single malt whiskey. And in the course of that review, I mentioned that there were, in the Chicago area at least, and probably where you are, exactly 4 bottles of single malt whiskey that were available under $40 that were bottled higher than 40% and bottled with an age statement. And of the two that I thought were suitable for beginners, I mentioned the Glengoyne and but also the Speyburn 10-year-old. A day after I recorded that video, I went to my local Binny's, and I thought, hell, I'll give Speyburn another try because I remember it being, pretty darn good. And to my horror, I discovered that sometime in the last couple of years, they've knocked the strength down. They've moved it from 43% down to 40. So there are now 3 single malts available under $40, bottled above 40%, with an age statement. For shame, Inverhouse, you should. I want my 3% back. So now, if you're kind of a beginner and you're looking to buy a bottle of single malt that's not too expensive, Glengoyne 10 is kind of the only one I can point you to. But I am not a beginner. So what I could do with my disappointment was move down the shelf past the Loch Lomond 12-year-old, which is another option. I bought a bottle of that last year, and God bless them, they're trying. They're getting there. There's promise, but right now I'd say it's an 82, and certainly not for beginners. Instead, I bought this. This is Tomatin, 12-year-old. So I will pour a bit of this, talk about it with no water, and then talk a little bit more about the distillery and the malt. Yeah, okay. So for me, the overwhelming signature on Tomatin is orange. But not like nice. This is not like a nice navel orange that's right at the right place with, when you squeeze it into orange juice. This is like bitter orange and sour orange. This is like orange pith. Some apple, but it's also not nice apple. It's like it's almost like a cider apple that's overripe. So you don't really want to eat it anymore. Yeah, more orange. A little bit of kind of dustiness. It smells a little bit like an attic. But then aside from those, the sort of aggressive, unfun fruity notes, you have this sort of more confectionery side of it. It's like if I think in Switzerland there's a thing called muesli, which is this sort of cereal mix made up of fruit and different kinds of grains, and you kind of throw them together in some milk and you leave forever, and then you eat it. This smells a little bit like that. There's some like pound cake in there, maybe, and just a little hint of like cigar smoke, more like island cigars than, so think like Dominican cigars or something like that. On the palate, oh yeah, orange again kind of rules this. Yeah, very bitter, sour, astringent. I'm loving this actually. All of these sound unpleasant. This is actually, I think this is great. There's also like a kind of a cayenne pepper note. Hang on. So, okay, In the U.S., all the mole is the black mole with the chocolate and stuff. This is reminding me of like more the, I don't know what's the name of it. There's a yellow mole that's more savory, which this has kind of that going on. It's lots of chilies, but also some stock or something in there. Um, mhm. Yeah, this is not. They didn't put a lot of fresh casks into this. There's not a lot of cask influence going on in this. This is all just the spirit. You also have that confectionery side again. There's a thing if you at Trader Joe's called pancake bread, which is their attempt to like kind of turn a cake out of a stack of pancakes, and it doesn't. That's not really what it is, but it's suggesting that direct. It's like a cake suggesting in the direction of pancakes, if I can put it that way. Um, yeah, muesli again. Okay. Um, so it's a weird, is what I'm getting at. I'm gonna add a squirt of water to this and leave it to sit while I tell you a little bit about Tomatin. Um, so this is I actually like this stuff a lot, but again, it's not something I would throw at a beginner. It because it's so unusual in character and kind of not friendly to an American palate. Um, I think the way you can begin to understand this malt is by thinking about the nature of the distillery. Tomatin goes back to the late 1890s, but they were building the thing up for decades. It sort of reached its height in the 70s, where it was, I believe, the biggest distillery in Scotland. They've since torn stuff out since then. Now, there was always a little bit of single malt bottling going on, even back then. But Tomatin was always kind of intended as like a blending malt. Um, this is something made for blended whiskey. But when I say that, most of the time, when you think of like blending malt, you're thinking of like the kind of jobbing distilleries, right? Which don't have a lot of personality, like oh, I don't know, Dufftown, maybe, or Balmenic or something. Kind of nice, but not a lot of character to them. This has tons of character. Um, this is not a heavy whiskey in the traditional sense. It's not like a like a Lagavulin or even a Macallan or something. It doesn't have those sort of heavy, heavier oily notes. But it's very spirity, but it feels heavy. It reminds me of Glen Grant in a certain respect, although it has a very different flavor profile. Um, what I'm getting at is this is intended for blends, but it's more of a flavor malt, right? So think of this more in terms of Kalila than Dufftown, right? It's not peated, but this is something you throw into your blend to kind of make it more interesting. Um, it's just doing that by adding like this attack of fruitiness and just, but not, it's not American friendly fruitiness, which is why I can't really recommend this to beginners. The American palate. Oh, we're almost there. The American palate. Let me back up a little bit. So a lot of the time when people talk about beginner whiskeys versus more advanced whiskeys, they're talking about peat. And the thing is, in my experience, not most, but these sorts of Americans who are interested in spending money on whiskey and care don't usually have a lot of problems with peat. Some people do, and you got to get over that at some point. But I mean, we're a culture that grew up and made a science out of barbecue. Like we know smoke. Peat smoke is a little bit new to us, but I mean, we've got brisket, we've got bacon, we've got smoked everything already. Smoke isn't really a problem. The kinds of things that the American palate has problems with are stringency, right? Sours, Bitters to some extent. Bitters not backed up by sugar or anything. Um, it's not. There's no funk in here, but funk can also be a problem, like fainty notes or sort of ugly fermenty notes, which I've kind of grown to love with experience. But they can be a little off-putting. Um, this is a very sort of um, grainy sour sort of whiskey, which can be a little bit daunting for people coming to whiskey for the first time. Yeah, I would put this in the same category as something like a Ben Riach, or even to some extent like a Springbank. This is something you come to a little bit later down the road, even though it's at least in Chicago, $35. This is one of the best sort of you know uh, integrity malts, if you like, um, um, available at that price, anyways. Um, so, I mean, there's a question of like, where does this go? Where does it sort of fit on the map? All right. When you add a little bit of water to this, it doesn't change quite as much as the Glengoyne, which suggests to me that maybe the casks, as I mentioned, they're not using a lot of fresh cask in this. What comes out is kind of peach. Well, more like a mix of stone fruit, but peach, like underripe peach, is kind of in the front there. Yeah, more orange, a little hint of vanilla, not too much. Um, Forest honey, the sort of bitter honey, if you know that. Um, like porridge in there with the muesli. Even a little like a little, we'll throw in a little bit of fudge, not chocolate fudge, just like regular old English fudge. Um, and on the palate, mm-mm. Actually, the mole comes right to the surface. Oh, but the peach too. Um, it gets a hair sweeter, but this is still, um, dominated by that sort of bitter orange pith note. Um, um, a little hazelnut actually, and fennel. Ooh, tea, not English, like Irish breakfast tea, something a little more aggressive. And almost like a pickled ginger note. Like if you ever go to like eat sushi and you sort of grab the ginger thing, you just stuff it all in your mouth like for fun. There's a little bit of that. Um, um, if this is the first malt someone is going to, they might have some trouble with this. I think it's fantastic. I think it is um, a beautiful spirit-led whiskey that is you got to give it um, a chance, and you got to kind of be willing to ride with those notes that aren't so uncomfortable to an American palate. I'm going to give this an 83 plus. It's actually better than I remember it being a couple of years ago. I don't know if they've sort of upped the quality or what, but I think this is good stuff. There's a question of like, okay, what do you where does this sort of fall in the trajectory of a malt drinker? If it's not a beginner malt, but once you're more advanced, like you're spending more money, right? You're chasing after the Springbanks and the Kleinliches and all those. Um, so what I would say is, where does a $35 bottle fall in that range? That's only an 83 plus. I mean, if it's not a good like first bottle to buy, um, it might be a good like fourth or fifth bottle, if I can put it that way. What I mean is somewhere around the line, you should buy something really crazy as like a third or fourth bottle, like a Laphroaig cast strength or something, Just something that's going to blow you out. Maybe an Aberlour or Abena, something like that. Um, and a week into that, your senses are going to be so destroyed by the sensory assault of those malts that you'll need something to help kind of recalibrate you. And that's where I think you can sort of go back to the liquor store and buy a bottle of this as a kind of aperitif. Use this to kind of get your palate set for those more extreme flavors. I mean, there's extreme flavors in this, but it's just not going to punch you in the face in the same sort of way. Um, so yeah, as a fifth bottle to use as a rest in between everything else, or not a rest, like a hopping off point, this is the thing that's going to usher you in to kind of reset your palate, like pickled ginger. Actually, that's what it's supposed to be doing. So well done, Tomatin. You're never going to be commercial. I'm sorry, but this is great. I love this stuff. Oh, rest of the range. There's an 18-year-old, which is not stellar. It's okay. There's a peated version, which I can't remember the name of, which last time I had it, it really kind of wasn't worth it. And there's a dual something. It's called Legacy overseas, which has no age statement, and it's just too much virgin oak in there. I wouldn't recommend it. But the 12, I mean, if you put the time in for other malts and you're sort of willing to deal with something a little bit difficult, I think it's excellent. 83 plus. Cheers.